Yes. Sweet.
Classroom voice to wrangle
my
people.
classroom.
Oh, I think we're supposed to wave.
That's right. No, because that's when you give. This is to get. We're not recording, but. All right. If we can have everyone's attention, we'd like to start. Begin, please, before they start recording, so it doesn't sound like and something you're saying might get picked out of the camera. So, you ready to give them the thumbs up?
Yes, thumbs up. All right, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to YANovCon 2020. We cannot tell you how excited we are that we've made it to 5 years. That is so amazing. It's our 5th annual. Woo! So it started out as a baby idea. We got inspired by a festival in Southern California, the Ontario Book Fest, if you know it. And at our first YANovCon, we had less than 50 people, and we have grown so much, so we're super excited. Thank you to all the folks that were at the first YANovCon, some of our authors here today, and some of our bloggers, maybe some participants as well. And thank you to everyone who has helped make it what it is today, because it really has grown a lot. And thank you all for being here today. We're really excited to celebrate our 5th annual YANovCon with you.
So back at that first YANovCon in the fall of 2015, we had 9 authors. We're very excited that we're bringing you 19 authors today. One of our authors, Darcy Rosenblatt, did come down with a bug, and so she's not joining us today, but we have 19 amazing authors here today, and I'm going to have them kind of stroll along the wall, separate just a little bit, so when I say your names, you can raise your hand so they can see who they might be wanting to. This is it. This is the lineup. And at quarterback, no. Okay, there's so many. Woohoo! Yeah. Da, 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 da. Oh no, we've all graduated, all right. So, we're going alphabetical by last name. We have Gloria Chow. There she is. Faith Gardner. Katie Henry. Doogie Horner. Ann Jacobus. Kelly Jensen. Kaylin Josephson. Rahul, I'm sorry, part of the problem is your name is broken in two, you're not on a line. I might have you broken here. So, thank you, Rahul, thank you. Claire Kann. C.B. Lee. Anna Marie McLemore. Gretchen McNeil. Kate O'Shaughnessy. Parker Peavy House. Shannon Price. Amy Reed. Scott Reitgen. N.H. Sensei, and Matungi Subramanian. All right, big round of applause. Woo! And just for any of you who are buying N.H. Sensei's books, just so you know, she will be at the panels, but it's not going to be for the 101s and the autograph session, so you might want to sneak that book in when you see her running by. Right, so there we go. I have part 2 now. I have props. Oh yeah, so now you guys can go ahead and leave if you're in the opening panel, so thank you. Get comfy, go back to the green room, wherever you want to be. All right, so when you registered this morning, you should have gotten a program. Please note the map. You are in the Chakotay room. I know it says community out there as well. Please ignore that part of the thing. This is the Chakotay room. So any event that is happening in the Chakotay room is in this room. The community room is down the stairs, and it's that portable right there. If you have any sort of issues where stairs are difficult, let staff know, and we will show you ramps to help you get to there. The other room is called the meeting room. That is actually, as you start entering the library, go to your right, and it's that big room that's to the right before you enter the library. So that is the meeting room. So, go back and forth, back and forth. If you haven't already gotten a chance to look at the community fair and the tote bags and the button making, we will have that all day along with the book sales, courtesy of Books Inc. So we're very excited to have Books Inc. again partner with us for this year. Yep. Yeah, I guess I'm all done. Short story contest. This is something that we didn't have our very first year. Oh, so, but as soon as we're done with going over the rest of this, we'll talk about the short story contest, and Carla will talk about that, so.
Okay, so after the short story contest announcement and the opening session, you will then break out into whatever breakout session you'd like to go to. There are 3 panels to choose from during the first breakout session and another 3 to choose from during the second. So there will be different authors on each one. We named them, they're themed, so take a look and see what appeals to you. And we will have staff in blue or black shirts and lanyards. There might be green lanyards, they might be black lanyards, but there will be lots of staff to help direct you around. And then after the breakout sessions, we'll have our author one-on-ones. We'll split this into 2 rooms, and so we want you to choose one room to stay in. So you pick whatever one appeals to you. The authors are listed on the program under which room they'll be in, so if you want to talk to a certain author, then make sure you're in that room. And we'll explain how that works when you get in there. And then after the author one-on-ones, we'll have an all-author book signing. So we hope that you can stay all day with us. Logistic stuff, bathrooms are located in the lobby of the library, so straight across, diagonal from here are the big library doors, and to the right are restrooms. So if you need restrooms at any point during the day, feel free to go to that. And we want to do some thank yous, and then we'll do the short story contest announcement.
All right. So, this event was made possible thanks to the Burlingame Public Library, the Daly City Public Library, the Menlo Park Public Library, the Redwood City Public Library, the San Bruno Public Library, the San Mateo City Library, the San Mateo County Libraries. Whew. The San Francisco Public Libraries, Books Inc., Ina Penglin, Jana Moramata, Christy Hayes, Mina Whitman, Star Vista, Jobs for Youth, and the U.S. Census. Thank them all.
Our bloggers.
4 of those people we mentioned happen to be our bloggers. They're in the back of the room. Okay. All right. Without them, they spread the word about YA books throughout the county and the United States and hopefully the world. So maybe there's somebody here watching on TV. So welcome to San Mateo County. Minna, are you in here? Did you go away? Okay. We have a 4th moderator, but she must have gone with the authors. So I would like to introduce from San Mateo City Library, the overseer of the short story contest this year, Carla Abertol. Abertable.
Don't worry, no one can pronounce my last name. So for the last few years, part of YANovCon has been a short story contest that's open for 6th through 12th graders. We give a prompt to that age group and they write a short story that's 500 words or less. This year we had over 130 entries. I think we had 136. 2 people, I think, were anonymous, so we couldn't really add them into the contest. But I have to say, having formatted all the stories, I didn't read every word of every one, but there were a lot. I was very impressed with the content and the quality of the content, especially from students who were in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. It was great to see kids' ideas, how sophisticated they are. And yeah, it was really special to be able to format all that and see what great short stories kids wrote. So I'm going to start with the honorable mentions, and maybe my pronunciation of your last name might not be the greatest, so I apologize for that. But from 10th grade, Allison Shu, Instagram model, was a winner. I think actually Are you here? If you're here, come up and we have a bag for you. I think that she might be coming later because she has a volunteering thing. Another honorable mention was Alexander Tan for procrastination. I don't know if you're here yet. We got like applaud. And another honorable mention was On the Court by Katie Sheng. If you know any of those kids, tell them to seek me out later if they show up because we want them to read for the Millbrae TV station. So in third place was a short story called Inevitable by Ali Chu. Should she read it now? Ali, we were wondering also if you would want to read your short story right now or just take your bag.
I can read this story right now.
All right, well, let me just read everybody off and I can go print it for you. But here's your book bag of swag. In second place was a short story called Waiting to Be Perfect by Hannah Paik. Are you here? And I know that the first place winner is sitting right over there, and Kaylee McDonald won first place for her short story, The Mirror. And do you have your short story? All right, let me go print off the other one really quick.
So this is your bag of goodies. Do you need me to hold, or can you hold and talk and write? I can just tell
Maybe you hold.
podium.
Okay.
Raise me up.
I looked down. There it was, a big, fat, bloody red B. How? How could I have gotten a B? I thought my essay was flawless. This stupid, stupid paper was the single defining determinant that made my grade an A or a B. What would I do? My parents would kill me. They would set me up with a fancy writing tutor that cost $100 an hour. They would take away my phone until I got an A. They would prevent me from hanging out with my friends. This single life-defining B was all it took for my life to be hell. Was it even worth coming home at all? What would they say? More importantly, what would they do? My teacher might as well show up at my door with my head stabbed on a pole. I wouldn't disappoint my parents then. At that moment, my eyes welled up, threatening to cast forth a pool of tears. Not even a pool, the whole damn ocean if last week's episode was any inclination. I swear, if I bottled up all the tears I shed for bad papers or low test scores, I could have cured California's drought. My nose started to clog with snot. My lashes shouldered the tears that began to spill. I stood up, mumbled something about using the restroom, and took the bright yellow pass out the door. It was a desperate sprint to the bathroom. How long could I make it before I burst into tears? I pawed my giant Harvard sweater over my hands and used it to wipe away my snot. I threw myself into the bathroom stall and let the tears come. Heavy sounds broke from my chest and my vision blurred. The chipped paint of the tiles faded in and out of focus while I furiously wiped my eyes. It was 10 minutes or longer before I emerged from the bleak stall. Staring in the mirror was a face that I couldn't recognize. She had limp black hair, smudged mascara, and a dripping nose. The saltiness of my tears had made its way into my mouth, making me lick my already chapped lips. My snot-covered sweatshirt was a darker shade of gray than before. I looked back into the mirror. The same blotchy face greeted me once again. Okay, breakdown session over. Time to put yourself together. I slipped my dark strands into a ponytail, scrubbed at my raccoon eyes until my skin was raw, dabbed at my nose with paper towels. The sweatshirt came off, and I tucked the tear-stained sleeves close to my body so no one could see. For the last time, I looked in the mirror. There I was, perfectly put together, tear-free with slightly pink cheeks. It was okay. I was normal. I pushed the bathroom door open and stepped back into the real world, shoving that broken version of myself deep, deep down. Until the next time.
So the prompt for this year's short story contest was, we understand that social media and academic pressure can create a lot of anxiety in middle and high school students. Many people come up with healthy and unhealthy techniques to handle this pressure. How might the characters in your story work through these issues? So that was their prompt to write the story. And following up on that, we actually had some art projects at our local branches where we asked the students to, with spray paint, their silhouettes, and then fill in their silhouettes with some of this anxiety that they might, or what caused anxiety. So if you have time later on today, take a look, because these are actually written by the students of San Mateo County at various branches. So it's, you know, it's not easy being a teenager, not now, not never. So.
We're gonna have one more reader.
Yeah. Am I? Huh?
We have one more reader, but she's ready. Okay, so we're going to have our third place winner come up and read her story.
Okay. The year was 2093, and the fourth industrial revolution passed, automating all menial jobs that paid minimum wage. The United States reached world peace in 2085 and eradicated the military. All the funds for the military were shifted towards the Department of Education. The only option after high school was college, thus making high school years even more stressful. Alexandra sat on the couch in her living room. The TV was turned onto Channel 4 news station, and she was watching attentively. The anchor recited, teen suicide rates are up in the last 3 months. Two teenagers were found dead in. The TV turned black. Alexandra looked up to see her mother holding the remote. Why are you not studying? You're going to be rejected by every college if you don't get back to studying. Also, I saw you leave the house yesterday. Don't go hang out with your friends. You have better things to do, yelled Alexandra's mother. Alexandra was used to this response, but she knew that there was some truth to her mother's words. She wasn't the brightest in her class, yet she wasn't dumb either. However, her parents pushed her way beyond her limits and pressured her to do better. She believed this was the real cause to her academic failures, the pressure from her parents. After her lecture, she went up to her room to please her parents, but she wasn't going to study. She needed to get out of the suffocating environment. She grabbed a jacket, locked the door to her room, and climbed out the window. She was going to meet up with her friend, Molly. From the bush outside, she grabbed her skateboard and rode to the movie theater. "What's up?" Molly asked. "Nothing much. My parents are just on my back about school again. I wish high school was easier," Alexandra responded. "Me too, and that's why I called you to the movie theater. I met someone who said they can help us with school. Follow me." Alexandra followed her, eager to see what could help her succeed in school and get her parents off her back. "Jake," Molly yelled. "You made it. I brought the goods," said Jake. He pulled out some bright pills that made Alexandra skeptical. "They're neurological enhancer pills. Pop one of these into you and you'll be as smart as Albert Einstein, and the pressure of school will be over." Molly grabbed the pills from Jake's hand and gave him money. "Enjoy, girls," he said with a smile as he walked away. "Are you sure we should do this?" Alexandra asked. She knew her parents wouldn't approve of this, but she wanted them to stop worrying about her academics. "You wanted your parents off your back, right?" responded Molly. "Yeah, I guess you're right." Just like that, the two girls ingested the pills, and their worlds went dark. There was truth in Jake's words as well. The pressure of school was over.
So now you can, we have an opening session that will start in a little over 5 minutes. So you can stay in here if you need to quickly run and use the restroom, or if you wanted to go get a bag really quick, just come back at 1:05 for our opening session on anxiety on the brain. So yeah, feel free to do that, and we'll see you soon.
Sorry. so I couldn't read it in a stream. I kept feeling like I was tripping over your name. It's like, I should know. I have a boss whose last name is Rahul.
Yeah? What school were you? Cool. Did you have a good time?
Does these work?
Hey. Oh, I love it.
Hello. This doesn't really feel like. Does this work?
You are. How do I spell your name?
Yeah, maybe it should be turned up a little.
They just not put enough chairs and microphones. Hey, we haven't met me.
Hey. Okay.
No.
Are you Iranian?
I didn't get one either. Our table didn't get on my table.
Thank you. Are you going to stay for the
I have
panel?
a friend who's named Nahid.
There's a really fun discussion if you want
Are
to
you
stay.
Indian?
Pakistani?
Okay, but thank you. It was good to see you.
Partition, everybody was Indian?
Well, I mean, now it's very loaded to say something like that. I would never say something like that.
I would. My grandmother from my dad's side is buried in India, and my grandmother from my mom's side is buried in Pakistan.
Oh, really?
Oh, we can scoot.
Oh, am I not here? Should come. Okay. Thank you for checking in on me. I'm butting into sessions. that I
Hello.
should share a microphone.
Hello.
Yeah, that's. Okay. Okay. I just adopted a 4-month-old from Morocco. My brain is half not functioning.
That's the next one. So same room, 205.
Can I pay you to do like my, personal?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm like, that was really confusing.
It's okay. It's early. It's the first panel of the day.
I guess.
Thank you. Thanks. Beauty Bakery. Yeah, it's really good. It stays on. I can eat. It's the main thing I look for in lipstick. Yeah. Yeah.
Responsible authors brought their own books to
Hello.
show
I
off.
didn't. I borrowed it.
Hi, I'm Amy.
That sounds good.
I'm Claire. Nice to meet you.
Go do that. Thanks. Colors are really great. Yeah, I like it too.
I'm like, I brought two because I have no shame.
Do it.
I got 3, but they're like, you can only have 1. I was like, ah.
It's 2020, the year of being proud of
I think you should.
I don't want to
No, I don't need
Like,
water.
I'll just
Dude,
mention it
people,
and
we
then
probably
hold
should
it
get
and
cups or.
No,
Oh no, dude, we're not doing cups. No cups.
You
We're in
could
the
just drink directly out of that.
We're in the PC post-cup era. It's okay.
Bring you a cup.
No, I'm okay.
Hey, look, did we meet earlier?
Hello.
Hello.
Oh,
Okay,
hello.
that's
Thank
a little
you for
louder.
organizing, putting together. It's been a lovely.
For coming.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Claire, hello.
Really excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
The hardest part is over. My role, now I can just wander around and have fun and not say anything about anybody anymore. I don't know how you all do it. I am not
Me neither.
in front of people.
Well, we are on a panel about anxiety.
We're going to talk about how
Yes,
we do it.
there's some
Or not
coping
do it.
involved. I keep fogging up my glasses. That's how bad this is today.
I tend to do that too because I like heat up when I get
distance from the microphone. I think that's what we should do.
Sounds great.
Yeah, this sounds right. This sounds good. I am Rahul. I'm moderating the panel with this wonderful audience or participants, number of participants that we have. Why don't you start at the end with Kelly and introduce yourselves and maybe talk about what sort of connection anxiety has to like your subject matter and basically why somebody picked you for this panel?
Sure. My name is Kelly Jensen, and I am the editor and contributor to Don't Call Me Crazy, 33 Voices Start the Conversation About Mental Health. And I'm on this panel because I've written about mental health and because I have anxiety, and that is what I touch on in my own book here.
Hello. Oh. Hi, I'm CB Lee. I'm the author of the Sidekick Squad series, which is about a group of teens, some of whom have powers or not have powers, but one thing they all have common is struggling to be a teenager in a world where they're constantly having to prove themselves. And they deal a lot with anxiety and the pressure of, what is normal, not normal. I'm also bipolar. I have had a lot of experience with anxiety and major depression, and mental health is really important to me and having the conversation about mental health. So really excited to be on this panel to chat more about these topics with you.
My name's Kann. I'm the author of Let's Talk About Love and If It Makes You Happy. And my books are almost always about teens who are struggling in some way to just kind of find their place in the existence that they've been thrown in. And I'm on this panel because when you're filling out the form, it asks you, do you have any of these things? And I checked anxiety, and I talked a little bit about it, and they thought I had something to offer. So I'm here to talk about why the world makes me nervous.
My name is Amy Reed. I am the author of 10 young adult novels. The most recent is The Boy and Girl Who Broke the World. And from about the age of 13, I've dealt with anxiety and panic disorder, and mental health issues in general play a really big part in, I think, all of my books. I'm excited to talk about it with you.
Hi, I'm Rahul. I'm the author of 2 novels. This one is out, and this one's coming out eventually. This book is about a girl who really wants to get into Stanford, and it makes her do all kinds of crazy things. And I think, it's all about the panel's about academic pressure and anxiety and whatnots. Which brings me to the first thing I wanted to talk about, which is I don't know. Maybe it's the way I was raised, but I've always just felt that anxiety is inextricable from high performance and from doing well. What do you guys think about that? Do you know people who perform well, people who got really good grades who weren't terrible, anxious messes?
Well, I got good grades by accident. I'm very lazy, and I like to take the road that's definitely traveled a lot. It's there's footprints and it's just completely dirty. But what happened was the reason why I'm that way is because I was too busy worrying about everything else. So I was born, with the brain predisposed to having anxiety, and then everything else just sort of made it worse. So it had nothing to do with performance, in my case.
I feel like the pressure of performance, especially as a high school teen, where a lot of the markers of success were defined by you have to go to a 4-year college or university. In order to get there, you have to perform at this level where you are not only a AP student, but you are a good person. You volunteer. You're president of this. You're a captain of that. You play sports. You're well. And so it's just I pulled myself in all these different directions. I don't think I worked harder in my life than I did in high school. And that's coming from someone who's written multiple novels and done the college thing. But it was a major stressing point, to the point where it definitely, content warnings for anyone who may be uncomfortable or may need to step out. When I was a senior in high school, I attempted suicide because I felt like I couldn't. It was in the midst of college applications, and I had lost a personal planner or something where I had handwritten an essay. It wasn't even done. It was a first draft. And then I had a serious breakdown where I was like, if I don't do this essay, I can't get into college. I can't finish this application. If I don't go to college, I will completely, utterly fail at life. And that was a culmination of many things, like society, my parents, a lot of things where it's you need this four-year university to be successful. And I think most of my adult life has been kind of unpacking all of that and redefining success in my own ways. But anxiety and how I deal with anxiety, and I think teens now more so than ever, like at every point, because you're not only having all these pressures, but you know your brain is still developing as a person, and you know everything's happening so much, and so anxiety, yes, anxiety.
Thank you.
The question of, I'm glad that we're talking about it now a lot as well, because I think maybe even like 10, 15 years ago, it was taboo, whereas like no one wanted to talk about it. Like we're all like, oh yeah, so-and-so got into Stanford, so-and-so got into Berkeley, but they did it, so why can't you? And they're like, oh, they're high performing, even though underneath it all, everyone's like broken and struggling.
But yeah, sorry, Kelly.
Oh, I was going to say, I didn't know I had anxiety in high school. For me, I had depression, and I didn't know until I was older and started to get help for it just how intimately those two things were connected for me. So much of my time after school would be just in these periods of depression. I did a lot of sleeping, like naps were my way of dealing with everything. And it wasn't until I was older that I could unpack what that really meant, that it was like the anxiety had been so bad that it caused the crash, which then led to just not wanting to do anything for long periods of time. So sometimes that anxiety doesn't even look like anxiety, but it's anxiety that is presenting something else.
I think Claire brought up a really interesting point, which is she was talking about, you know, how she just felt like you're an anxious person, right? And I came at it and immediately kind of made the assumption it's like, oh, life makes us anxious or external stressors make us anxious. What do you think is the relation there between disposition and then, you know, what life does to you?
I think, did you want to? No. Okay. I think for me, like, part of like figuring out how to heal from my various mental health sort of struggles throughout my life have been really about like finding out is it really the external stressor or is it my response to it? And that's where I've found a lot of empowerment, in that like I am responsible for my own responses. I don't necessarily have control over all the things that are happening and all the pressures, and I don't even really have control over my feelings and thoughts sometimes, but I do have some sort of agency over how I choose to respond, and that's been kind of the major like aha healing thing for me in dealing with my anxiety.
Oh, so you're saying you don't necessarily try and control your anxious thoughts. You try to just try to stop anxiety from taking the driver's seat.
Well, I think because in that sort of the idea of controlling my anxious thoughts, there's like inherently some judgment there, and there's like a shaming sort of energy. And I think that for me, like I've had to just sort of accept that like I am a person who is prone to anxiety. Maybe that's because it was taught to me. Maybe it's because of my brain chemistry. Maybe it's a combination of all sorts of things. And like I can sort of like be compassionate and loving towards that part of myself and stop fighting it. And in that sort of like attempt at finding a peaceful relationship with it, it's a lot easier to kind of like deal with it. And it loses a lot of its power.
I saw people nodding their heads.
Yeah, I really love what you had to say there, Amy, about it took me a long time to figure out that as a strategy, where it's like I would get so upset at myself for just having the thoughts and like, oh, you're anxious. You're bad because now you're anxious. And then there would be, on top of the anxiety, there'd be like the judgment against myself.
Yeah, because the anxiety wasn't enough. You had to add more to it.
And then sometimes you try to control it so much that you give yourself anxiety about controlling the anxiety, and then it's just a spiral that never ends.
Mm-hmm. Or like I would be depressed that I was depressed, or like, and a lot of that also was tied to like creativity and like that feeling of like self-worth being tied to how much.
Just people, just remember to speak a little closer to the microphone, like 2-3 inches.
Yes. I was saying that a lot of the anxiety was tied to like because for so long my idea of self-worth was tied to like am I creating enough? Am I being productive enough? And then if I was depressed, I could not be productive in the same way, and then I would judge myself, and then all of that extra, like, on top of that. Like, how did, it sounds like you found like a really good strategy to like.
I can, in theory, yeah, like I can talk about it really well. But you know, I think it's just like it's just been a process over the years of just like really trying to not be so hard on myself all the time, and to like not choose to not buy into that story that you were talking about, that like we need to be productive and we need to achieve, and like who is telling us that, right? Like whose rule is it that we have to be that person? Like if I actually ask myself what it is I want peace. I want a sense of peace, and that doesn't necessarily mean like working constantly. It doesn't mean making a lot of money. It doesn't mean like having all of these accolades. It means like finding the wise and compassionate route to whatever I'm doing. And maybe that means that I work a little less, and maybe it means I like spend more time on self-care. And maybe to some people that might look like a little bit of lazy, but like I don't really need to care what they think because it's not their life, you know?
I think CB brought up an interesting point about, and Amy too, about the relationship between anxiety and our creative life, and the way like our creative life causes or, you know, is affected by anxiety. I will say that for me, writing is the chief source of anxiety in my life. I once read this book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. It's a great book. I love Dale Carnegie. I'm not afraid to admit it. But he, in one of his exercises, he says that you should write down your worries, and then you revisit them every 6 months or 12 months later, and you see how baseless and groundless they were, and how you spent so much time worrying about things that didn't come to pass. Like, you know, like I might write down something like, oh, I worried that like our panel would run out of things to say, and then I'd go back and I'd be like, oh no, actually, you know, 6 months later, it'd be like something different, terrible, and awful, different thing happened that day, but I didn't worry about it. It wasn't one of my worries. And I will say that like I did do that, and I've been doing that for years, and it's very helpful, except when it concerns anything to do with publishing and the publishing world, because when it comes to publishing, my anxieties almost invariably come true. Like I'll like look back and be like, oh, like I'm afraid like my agent will drop me. It's like, oh yeah, that happened. That happened. It's like, oh, I'm afraid like I'll lose my book deal. It's like, oh, that happened. I'm afraid I'll get dropped by my second agent. It's like, oh, that happened. So I would say that like, whereas non-publishing related anxieties, I have like a 90% chance of them not coming true. Publishing, it's more like a 30% chance of them not coming true.
Yeah, publishing's wild. It's a constant roller coaster that you can't leave.
Yeah, there's so much outside of our control. And that's the thing about worrying too. It's like, for me, like worrying is this attempt to like feel like a delusion that I'm in control of something, because if I think about it enough, then that means that I'm somehow working at it, or like I'm being vigilant, but like it's not actually affecting anyone other than myself. And so I try to like bring that sort of like, I try to remind myself of that when I just find myself in those spirals of anxiety where like I'm just digging myself into those stories, and I'm like, oh wait, I'm the only person experiencing this right now, and it actually has no effect on my actual life. Yeah, like really, my worrying has no effect on the publishing world or really any part of my life.
I found it kind of helpful to assign, like, because that voice in your head, that, like, I have this, like, constant, like, oh, no one likes you. No one wants to read your book. And so I was like, oh, it's like a Gollum type character. That's just, so I'm just like, okay, now this is a character that can, like, go away. Or like, oh, you're doing the thing again. And by, whereas, like, okay, yes, it's still me, but it's also, like, the anxious part of me. I was like, okay, am I actually... am I doing something, or is it my anxiety brain doing something? And then I can distract it, or I can like throw a ball for it to go fetch, and then it'll be distracted while chasing that ball. But I don't know. My therapist was like, that's good. So you can just like talk to Gollum and then recognize that Gollum is not a reasonable like thought process. I don't know if anyone's ever used that sort of strategy.
That's such a good strategy. Like talking to like your parts. I don't know if any like my therapist and I do lots of parts work, but anyways, that's another story. But no, but like yeah, like just at like those little voices in your head, like what do you really want? You know, and usually they're scared and they like want some sort of like comforting, you know, and like that's where my anxiety always comes from. It comes from a place of fear that I'm not going to get what I need or something I have is going to get taken away from me. And usually they're very unfounded.
Weirdly, I have zero anxiety when it comes to the publishing world. I don't know if it's just because I'm so like, I don't expect anything. So when anything happens, it's like, oh, well, that's great. But I do, the challenge I have, and it especially came with this book, is I edit other people's work. And my work is nonfiction. So I'm dealing with people's real lived experiences. And with this book in particular, I had the worst time as an editor asking people to like dig deeper into these scars that they have and do so in a way that respects their experience but also serves the story. And that was hard. I mean, these pieces, I usually turn stuff around in like a week. Some of them were taking me a month just because I didn't know how to do it. And it was giving me such like anxiety to think about somebody getting those edits and then them having some kind of experience with it. And I mean, I had writers who said like, I need to take some time, you know, like and for me, that's fine. Like that's, you know, I expect that, but it's so difficult to be in that position of like, I know how it feels, and also like, I need more from you, but also take care of yourself while you're doing it. It's a fine line to toe there.
That's really interesting. Are there ways, and does that resonate with you guys? Are there ways in which you find yourself managing or worrying about other people's anxieties? No.
I don't have the capacity to worry about, like in an anxious sense, anyone else besides what's happening to me. Like if they're a part of like my immediate life, that does happen where I worry for them. Typically that they're, you know, trigger warning, they're going to die. Like that happens a lot. But I find the main problem I have is when you believe in the law of attraction, you know, good things will come to me if I have positive thinking. If I want that book deal, it's going to come to me, and that happens. Like I wish for things and then they happen. But if you're worrying about the bad things and then the bad things happen, did I make those bad things happen? Mm-hmm. And I know the answer is no. I did not make those bad things happen, but the voice in my head says, yes, you did. So I cannot allow myself to worry for anyone else. As a part of that's how I cope with it, is I can't worry about you because then bad things will happen to you.
Interesting. So what kinds of things do you worry about other than people dying?
Car accidents where people die.
I remember once talking to a friend who had terrible anxiety, and he said that when he was walking down the street, he would look into the eyes of the people driving in their cars, and he would think, that person hates me. I was like, that, I don't know, this was very terrifying. It like kind of didn't resonate with me at all. Like I don't necessarily spend that much time worrying about what other people think of me. I always worry for myself that I'll like do something terrible. Like for years I used to have these nightmares where I would like accidentally murder somebody, or like, yeah, usually with my car, but you know, just all kinds of ways of doing it. So what kinds of things do you guys worry about? Also, should I not say guys? Is guys triggering? You people.
Y'all.
Y'all is a great word. Mm-hmm. Great. I feel like I really, like, I'm trying to unlearn, and I think it's a definite learned experience, either personality-wise or the way that I was raised, and like where I've always been, incredibly empathetic to the point where I've been taught to put myself last. I don't know if it's being raised as like the youngest daughter, or like being like a first generation, like my parents are immigrants, and like being in a culture where like you have to value yourself less to take care of others. And so I've always been taking care of other people's feelings, even when they've been the ones to hurt me. And so like in friendships, relationships, and like I'm trying, I think one of the things that I really want to learn and I'm working on is to put myself first and put my own feelings first, because I tend to, I have what your friend has, where I used to like, or, you know, I go to an event and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't remember that person's name, so they must hate me. Or I'd be walking down the street and I don't know, like a driver I was like, oh, I wasn't like, I do the half jog while I'm crossing the street, because I'm like, oh, I'm not going fast enough, and they wanted to turn right, and I'm, you know, they might be late for something. And then I was like, why am it's such like an extravagant thought process where I would add so much stress to my day worrying about, you know, and these things that ultimately may or may not have been happening, you know, and everybody's also like, everyone's responsible for their own life and their own thoughts and their own actions. And so when I was adding all of that onto me, it would, like, I realized that I was like going through all these hoops in my own day where I was making life harder for myself just because it might make, like, I was thinking about like 10 steps ahead for like everybody else who might either like be interacting with my space or like I might run into. And part of it comes from like doing like event planning and like where my job was to worry about what other people were doing and thinking and making sure that everybody was having a good time. But that was a big cause of like my worry and anxiety. And so I don't know, there's a lot of layers there yeah, learning to, you know, it's the life jacket thing where you got to put on your own first before you help others. And you also, and something creatively too, just like you can't pour from an empty cup. And I remember just being so like exhausted and like I would have nothing to give because I had nothing left. So I was giving it all away and keeping none of that love for myself.
I totally relate to everything you just said. But like when you said the whole like I jog run across the street to, like I think that I have this deep fear of being a burden. Like that's where like a lot of my stuff comes from. And so that's where a lot of my like, okay, I'm gonna sort of like try to kind of manage everybody else's feelings and make sure everybody else is okay because that'll make me okay. And it's just that codependent sort of like way of interacting in the world where like I'm so externally focused. And I think for me, so much of that comes from just like being raised by a mom who had severe anxiety and OCD and like being so, always having to be very vigilant about her mood and feeling responsible to make she was okay. And like, so like, I think that that's a lot of people's experience, right? Where we have these like deep emotional patterns that were created when we were very little. And so part of growing up and like becoming an adult is like investigating those and like creating new neural pathways, you know, and like healing all that stuff. And yeah, and it is really all about like really asking like, what is it that I need and where can I set a boundary and not take on other people's stuff?
Thank you. I think one thing we discussed before the panel is the role of social media and how social media affects and feeds into our anxieties. I feel like in this one, I've always like kind of felt like it was a bit, the role of social media is a bit like overhyped, to be honest. Like, I feel like people were envious of each other long before social media existed. But on the other hand, statistically, I am incorrect. And people are more anxious today than they've ever been, at least in terms of like diagnosable and self-reported anxiety.
I don't even know if it's so much of envy of other people as it is constantly knowing that you're on and anything you do or say or present is up for judgment to anybody who sees it. And that in a lot of ways is great. Like it's taught so many great things, but at the same time, it constantly makes you reevaluate your life on everything. Like, okay, if I say this thing, who's going to be mad about it? Like, how am I going to deal with it? And I know me personally, it got to a point on social media where I felt my anxiety attacks happening as I was doing even like neutral things. And I was like, why am I doing this to myself? And got rid of it because I was like, I don't need this in my life. And I think that at least when it comes to being an author, there's a lot of pressure put on us to be on social media. You know, like we need to do this and this and this and this. So then you have that and then you have this. Well, then you're up for constantly being evaluated. And it's like, well, something has to give or I can't write. Like I'm constantly just evaluating every single thing I'm doing when what I want to be doing is not this at all.
So I agree 100%. The constantly being on, that is such a good point because that's precisely what happens to me. I would tweet and get an adrenaline rush. Like I couldn't handle it. And for me, I don't use it at all because of that. And for the most part, social media doesn't really move the needle in terms of getting your face out there unless you go like viral and no one really actually wants that once it happens. It's terrible. But in terms of like book sales, it doesn't actually really help. But what you do miss out on is making connections with other authors. And that's really hard for me to deal with because I'm more of a, quality over quantity kind of girl. I don't need a lot of friends, but when I see all these conversations happening around me, my anxiety skyrockets and I have to leave. But then I get FOMO because I want to be there and I want to engage with my colleagues, but I just can't.
Yeah, I think like the whole FOMO thing is really big, and then like just comparing to other people, and that's stuff that existed long before social media ever did, but this is like a new tool to like strengthen those obsessions. And I find that it's really, really important to take breaks and to be really mindful of like what Kelly was saying, like when you feel like, I feel that like sort of the panic starting in my chest when I'm scrolling and be like, oh yeah, that's a sign that I really need to stop for a while.
Yeah, I basically like muted and unfollowed all other authors on social media. So now it's just like my techie friends being like, oh yeah, like I'm worth $100 million now. True story. But it that doesn't really bother me as much, to be honest. Like I once read an interview with author Richard Rodriguez, who lives in San Francisco, and he was like, being a writer in San Francisco is great because you're living in a city where nobody reads. And so, it's just like you feel so disconnected from the business going on around you. And I kind of feel that myself. I mean, people in San Francisco, they read once upon a time, but now they work really hard.
I definitely agree with what everyone said about like, it is a tool. And, in the past, you've had these feelings like, oh, Lady Bennington didn't come to my garden party. It must be because I wore the wrong gloves at her soiree and she didn't leave her colleague.
That's exactly what it's like.
Yeah,
that's not an exaggeration at all.
And, it's hard because like at the same time, like, we have all these different ways we can measure. Like you can actually you can analyze someone's brain to see like the dopamine rush from like doing something and like, oh yes, instant gratification. But there's also that fear that comes with it. Like, oh, I tweeted a thing. I thought it was funny. I wrote this cool joke about chapstick and how they must be in a different universe because they're always gone. And then like no one liked it. And it's literally been like seconds, like 5 seconds. And then I'm like, oh, I'm not funny. No one liked it. No one saw. And it's like you're constantly having to be on. And if you're not like instantly successful or like no one's engaging with you in the next like 5-10 minutes, you're like, did I do something wrong? What was it? And then that instead of that you're expecting that like dopamine rush, and then the lack of it creates like a, your brain does the chemistry bad thing.
Yeah, I don't know whether like young adult authors are the worst people to talk about social media because our relationship to it is so unhealthy, or whether we're the best people because I find, maybe this is just me, but that like the YA world strongly resembles not being in high school, but like more like being in middle school. because there's no sex, right? There's just
you know.
there's just backbiting.
I want to go
envy.
back to that a second. A lot of us do know about what's going on. It's just not there. Kind of like high school.
I see what you mean but instead of like, oh, Steve got those new Air Jordans and everyone else is wearing Air Jordans and I don't have Air Jordans, but maybe mom won't let me buy. It's like, but like I think there's that judgment where you're like, oh, my friend just got a new book announced. Oh, their cover looks so good. Oh, they got a starred review. Oh, and there's this barrage of but it's also on social media where it's like, everyone is presenting their the best things that happen, and so you perceive that life is a constant. Why is everyone else's life amazing and mine is not? And so, but it's not true. It's not true for that person that the good things are happening to, because that is one moment in the nuanced complication that is their life. But because there's a magnifying glass on all of these moments at once, it's easier to contrast your own.
And then it's the reaction, like you were saying, to those moments that really gets me, because I'm obsessed with being a good person. And for me, being a good person, part of that means being happy for other people. But if I'm constantly seeing other people getting starred reviews and book deals and I'm getting nothing, I find no joy for you. It's really hard for me to be happy for you when I'm just feeling terrible about myself. And so I just rather not see it.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to I think in many ways I use it to keep in touch with what's going on. I'm like, okay, for 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, cool, that cool thing is happening, good for them. And then I just shut it down, I close it. And then I have very specific I have a panda cam feed that I just go watch pandas. And specific internet things that are just it's just a stream of good things that make me feel good, where it's not tied to anything anxiety inducing or work related, or where I have to perform in any way. It's just cute animals on a never ending loop.
That's what we really need to use the internet for.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that why it was created? It was for cute animal videos, not to just be constantly selling ourselves to each other and being inauthentic online constantly. I want pandas.
Yeah, I just use social media to go online and broadcast when great things happen to me, so it looks like my life is perfect.
Yeah.
I wanted to open up the floor to questions, if there are any from the audience. Yes, you over here.
I have more of a comment. Per the conversation earlier about not caring about what other people think, my personal take on that is what other people think is about you is none of your business.
Thank you. What other people think about you is none of your business. That was the comment. Other questions? Yes?
How do you relate with this topic in your work? How do you bring it into what you're writing?
Oh yes, writing books. That's what we're here about.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Stories, made up stories in books, or true ones.
Yeah, I mean, my entire anthology is about mental health, and basically anything related to mental health or mental illness is covered in there. And it's 33 different people writing and drawing about their own experiences with their mental health and how it looks now, how it's changed and shifted over the years. And then as a whole, it's meant to allow people a place to start having these conversations where sometimes it could be difficult to do that.
So for me, like most authors, I write fiction, but I put parts of myself in each character, something I want to work through, and anxiety is my last great frontier. I haven't quite made it there yet, because I just, no. that's pretty, I'm not ready.
So you've never written about it,
No.
even though it's a huge part of your life. Seems like another thing to worry about.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, wow. That's a whole different story. I was just wondering if you find yourself more or less creative when you're super anxious, and if you've noticed any kind of link between the quality of what you're producing and how anxious you are.
This is a very dangerous question. So this is my answer, and I almost, okay. All right, I'm just gonna say it. I become more creative. So I have sleep or anxiety-induced insomnia. So that's the first thing when I'm super anxious, I cannot sleep. So I just wake up and then I write for hours. And then it's just some of the most brilliant work that ever comes out of me. But it's not, I don't depend on that. I have to learn how to write. I had to learn how to write outside of those moments. And I feel like once I realized I was able to do that, I knew I could have a potential career being an author. It's because I can work under any conditions at this point.
That's a really good question. I don't know that I've ever considered it that way before, and I'm sitting here like thinking about it. And what came to me is that it's really hard to tell the difference sometimes between anxiety and just like the adrenaline of creativity, and they can feel really similar, right? Like I feel them in my chest, and they feel like it's just like a similar thing. And I wonder too, like I think they also both have to do with like some kind of yearning, right? Of like just wanting something like very in like an extreme way. And I don't know that like that sort of creative drive or intensity is necessarily anxiety, but I'm curious like if it comes from kind of the same place and how they're related. But I just associate anxiety for me with like worrying and fear. And those don't serve me creatively. It's really hard for me to create anything when I'm like stuck in those kind of dark places. But it is interesting, like the similarities. I want to think about that.
I think it depends. Being bipolar, my anxiety comes in spikes. I do feel anxious all the time, depending on what's happening and external factors. But there's like, I also have like these moments where it's like either insomnia or heightened bits of energy where I'm restless and I cannot focus. And so sometimes it's good to direct that energy into doing something creative, but it isn't always productive. And I recognize that like, oh, what I just wrote was garbage, but it also was like good, productive garbage, because the act of doing it was like releasing that tension. And so I may be worried about something, or I may be trying to work through something, and if I can't focus, I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't talk, like whatever it is I'm going through, I try to just journal my way out of it. And then just the act of like pouring out that tension from my brain into the pen and those words. And then if it's good, I can make sense of it later. And most oftentimes it is not, but that's okay. And I've come to recognize that like and I think it's a struggle of being judgmental about my own creative process too, is that there are times when I cannot create, and I try to be gentler about like, resting is not wasted time. Self-care is not wasted time. Not creating is valid. And taking the time back just to live, to breathe, to spend time not doing the work is important as well.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
When you look back to when you were first struggling with anxiety, are there things that you wish that you knew, tools that you wish that you had, or resources that you would have been good to know about?
I would say when I first started struggling with anxiety, one major tool I used was alcohol. And that would have been a tool that it would have been better not to know about. But it did help.
And then when it's done, you feel more anxious, and then it's like a vicious cycle.
I don't know.
Like that was my experience.
I found that alcohol, like alcoholic drunkenness lasting for years, like really lowers your time horizon, or at least for me. So like I didn't worry about longer than the weekend.
Me, I would say the best tool was just actually having a name for it. So no one else in my family has anxiety, but it was very clear that I was not like everybody else. And I wouldn't say my family was against getting medical help, but it was frowned upon. Like they didn't want me to go to a therapist, and they didn't want me to talk to anyone. And I think if I had, when I was younger, my present would have been very different, maybe like a little bit easier.
I had a lot of outlets that I realized were probably why like I didn't get diagnosed until like I was 16. But one of the reasons why I was so like I was constantly like doing some sort of like I was in sports or physical activity. I played music, and so all of these like specific ways were like exhausting, and also like, and I come back to like these creative times, and now, and my mom also, I recognize that she was such an anxious person, always worrying, but she always was also doing something with her hands. Like she would be knitting or doing like these like Chinese knot designs, which are very intricate and complicated. And my dad was always doing like puzzles, like he loved Sudoku. And I learned that like, oh, these are very short-term specific tasks that occupy your brain. And I realized, and I actually talked to my therapist about this, and she was like, you know what, that's actually very good because it's very short. You can accomplish something in a goal, like you do a 9x9 grid of Sudoku or whatever, and then you're like, oh, I've solved the thing, and it was fairly simple, you do low difficulty, whatever. And then my mom would be like, oh, I've created this, now you have a scarf, and like, oh, we live in California, and it's too warm for scarves, but we have so many scarves. But it's great because
She lives in Southern California.
Yeah, I live in Los Angeles, so I'm sure there'd be more people to give scarves to. I'm sure.
Yes.
But one of the things I found that like is really useful for me, and I think also now that like writing is my work, is that having a specific hobby outside of writing that is creative and fun, but doesn't have like a scary consequence tied goal to it. Like I could just paint a square, or like I could knit a row, or something that's like not. There's no like. I don't know. I love video games, but I also get terrified because I'm like, oh, what if coming back to video games, because they're so achievement based and like goal oriented, and so finding games that like are just like open world, do whatever you want, collect butterflies, like build a farm, like those are really relaxing and helpful for me, like specific tasks like that.
Thank you.
I wasn't diagnosed until I was 30. So I lived with it for half my life without having a name for any of it. So like Claire, having a name for it was really helpful. And having a name for it came through first the diagnosis of depression and then understanding the relationship of those two things. And having that name is helpful for me to identify the feeling and then also know when it's coming, because sometimes I could feel either one sort of coming on, and being able to recognize that that's what's happening, and that means maybe I don't need to do this thing, or I notice that I'm trying to control 20 million things at once, and that's when I pause and say, this is anxiety, trying to have control over something, and I need to just let it go. Because I'm so high functioning, it was very easy never to see it, but I could feel it deeply.
I think for me too, I think what's been just like essential in sort of healing from anxiety is the connection with other people, because I had such an isolating experience with it, and I think that's true for a lot of people, where I just felt so alone and so stuck inside my head, and so just I learned to get in the habit of like reaching out to other people and talking about it, and like getting rid of that stigma and getting rid of that isolation, and like even if like I was talking to somebody and we didn't like necessarily talk about it specifically and come up with like solutions, just like reaching out and connecting with another human being really lessened the power of it. And for me personally also, meditation, like a regular meditation practice, has been completely transformative for me.
Are any of y'all afraid of public speaking?
No.
That's one of like the major fears that people have. Just thought it was kind of ironic, especially because we're just gonna now go to the audience and ask some of these people to raise their hand. Everybody will look at them. A microphone will come over, and they'll have to say their question to everybody.
But everybody's really supportive and kind in this room, so it's okay.
You don't know that.
I guess not.
I mean, to speak to that a little bit, it is funny because I have zero like public speaking fear at all.
Yeah, me
and I can
neither.
stand in front of a stage, hundreds of people, and it's like, it's fine. But I can be sitting at home by myself and suddenly just like I'm having anxiety that I just cannot get over at all. And I think a lot of it comes back to kind of what Amy said, is it's like in my head I can think, well, these people are here because they want to see me, so that doesn't doesn't give me anxiety. And if they don't want to see me, like, I don't care because I'm not going to see them again, or, you know. No, meanwhile, I have to, like, sit with myself again, you know, like, I'm never going to get away from myself.
It's okay. Some of them are just too afraid to stand up in front of everybody and leave. I see you. We see you. Questions? Yes. Oh, an actual child.
So, how have you dealt with anxiety when it comes to deadlines?
Here, let me just leap in here. Writer deadlines aren't real. They're not real
Tell that
deadlines.
to our publishers.
They're not real deadlines. Like when you're in school and you have a deadline, if you're a day late, that's bad, right? With writer deadlines, you can be months late, and it's kind of okay.
That is true. You can be months late as long as you communicate with your editor what's going on and why you're not turning in, but you can hit a point where they will say, turn it in or we're going to cancel you. So deadlines are real. Don't lie to the children.
Yeah. You know, Vikram Seth, the famous Indian author, he was 10 years late with his book, and they made him pay back his $2 million advance.
I think I'm a very strange person where deadlines make me feel safe because they create a structure, and I feel most anxious when I lack a structure. And so when I know what to expect, then I can plan accordingly. And so yeah, I like deadlines.
Deadlines give me such control over a situation that I love them. It's like, okay, you know, my deadline is tomorrow. No, let's not do that. My deadline's in a week, and I'll think to myself, man, it would be awesome if I can finish it tomorrow, and then I get the thing done. You know, it's like, I don't know how my brain does that, but my brain likes that. Like, it's a goal, and it feels attainable, and then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to push myself to do even better than that goal, and yeah.
That's where I'm trying to get. So now I'm still in the phase where I'm like, okay, it's due Friday and it's Monday, so why don't I start Wednesday? That's more than enough time.
I think the best thing, one of my professors in college said to me, I was having like a panic attack, and then I was like crying in the hallway, and then he was just like, are you okay? And then I continued to cry, and then we had a conversation where I was like, I don't think I can turn in this paper, and because I have all this other stuff going on. So he was like, well, what's the other stuff going on? And I like made a list of like everything I had to do that week, and then he was like, okay, what happens if you don't do this? What happens if you don't do this? And one of the things was like I volunteered at this nonprofit, and he was like, well, if you don't do this, no one is going to die. Like there's no like the thing that you think, like the worst thing that you think can happen is not actually the worst thing. It's like you're just perceiving it to be terrible and awful and life ending. Like for me at 16, like not making those college application deadlines, that was like the end of my world, except that it wasn't. Like I didn't turn in any college applications, I didn't apply to any universities, but I went to a 2-year community college and then actually had like the most amazing time meeting professors, and like I saved a lot of money, and like, you know, I transferred to a 4-year university, but like that experience, I think the hardest part was like the shame.
You've just blown some minds here tonight.
Community college is awesome.
CB missed her college application deadlines and did not go to a 4-year university as a result, and counts it as
okay.
Counts it as a positive experience.
Yeah, and I'm okay. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm doing things. And like even like after that, like in college, I had even more breakdowns, and then I got into a PhD program, and then I quit my PhD because it was just too stressful, and I realized that like I could finish this, but it will come at the cost of my mental health, and it is more important to me. Like you said, like I was like, what's important? Like being healthy and feeling good about what I've done with my life. And then I was like, well, what brings me the most joy? Telling stories. So then I like came back to that and was like, this to me is more important than having like a piece of paper that says I'm a doctor.
Thank you. And now we are at 11, what time is it? 1:55 exactly. And so our panel is over. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you all. Guys, take a little break. Take a deep breath. So at 1:05, our or 2:05, where are we at now? Yes, 2:05 will be starting our next breakout session. There are 3 of them. Again, there are 3 rooms here. You're in the Chakoti room, there's the community room, and the meeting room. You have the map right here. In this room, we will be having, where are we at? The not-so-secret identities, writing about ourselves, right? This is about who you are, your, whether you have, thank you, cultural identities. I just went blank on the word. I had my prompter, my teleprompter in the back all of a sudden popped up and said, this is what you're saying, cultural identities. So those will be happening in this room. If you want to walk down to the community center, it's what's so great about Sad Book. So this is going to be dealing with anxieties and stuff like that. And in the community room at the library, we will be having, the library meeting room, escaping everyday life into worlds not our own, science fiction and all those things not happening in the here and now. So thank you. Go enjoy yourself for 10 minutes. Bags, swag. Say hello to your friends.
I was a nominee. Yeah. And then I just didn't make the finalists is what happened. So.
Hello.
Yeah. They released it yesterday, so I was like, well, this is sad.
Okay, wait.
Not gonna cry.
Yeah.
Oh, are we sitting
Here, I'm gonna give you mine too.
Wait, let's just come over here where there's not a table.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna give you mine as well.
All right. Go out.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
You want to do that hand and I'll do this hand? All right.
I should get my
Right. All right, 1, 2, 3, smile. Say why is the best. Rock the world. Right. Anxiety is real. And I took multiple, so now you guys can pick and choose. I got quite a few. Start clicking. Whatever's going to be.